Welcome to another edition of Unplugged as we look back on our first foray into Friday night football for 2023. And the more things have changed this year, the more they stay the same. Last year, 5-1 heading into round 7 against Port Adelaide. We led 14-0 in that game last year. Ended up getting beaten by a point. 5-1 this year, playing Port Adelaide, who ironically were coming off a win against West Coast in Adelaide on both occasions. Led 14-0 and got beaten by just over a kick this time, 7 points. And it's funny when we talk about curses. Clearly there is a bogey side in Port Adelaide, but over that journey against us, they've beaten us by a point, 2 points, 4 points, 4 points, 6 points, 7 points, and 13 points. So we've had a look at them every time, but just don't win close games. It's kind of the opposite of what's happened when we played the Gold Coast, where we sort of beat them in every close game. Port Adelaide sadly beat us in every close game. Look, 5-2 is something that we would have taken at the start of the year, but it does feel like we did leave 4 points potentially out there against a side that, respect where it's due, did play better than us. I thought in many respects we were fortunate to get within 7 points, but in saying that, if you lose a game by that margin, there are plenty of chances for you to have won it, and I'm sure we can reflect on moments in that last quarter and moments after quarter time that had we have just done them a little bit differently, some brain fades and little bits and pieces. But we regroup, we go to North Melbourne, the injury news gets a little bit better, but at the same time, obviously we still play the waiting game on some of that. But we go down, we take on North, we're in third position, life's still pretty good, provided we can right the ship from here. Nick, I'll welcome you in. Quarter time, it was probably difficult to see what was going to happen. We looked in complete control. Port Adelaide it looked like they were just scrambling to stay in the game, but unfortunately it turned pretty quickly.
Yeah, it was one of those ones where it just felt like early in the game that Port weren't quite there. They hadn't turned up. You know, we were switched on from the start, but they potentially weren't. And then they kind of, quarter time, they regrouped and kind of clicked into gear, and they stepped up and we didn't. You know, I don't think we played all that badly, and we want to talk a little bit later on about how the sky isn't falling in. You know, see a lot of kind of drama and Saints panic, and this is what happens to Saints teams when they start a season well and then it all falls to pieces. But I don't think that's what's happening. It is frustrating at times, but I think that we can clearly see that there's development with this squad. We're growing. We've got young kids. We're competing hard. We're becoming a pretty good side. And I know that it's disappointing to have lost that game. Like you said, we had our moments, and potentially other weeks we win that game. Clearly, Port have the wood on us at the moment and have done for a while. But we didn't play that badly. We probably shot ourselves in the foot, but like you said, credit where it's due. Port were probably better when it counted in those moments. And, it is what it is. We move on.
As we welcome Charlie, who's filling in for Aaron, who's up in Queensland this week. Yeah, I don't know how you go on the gut feels, Charlie, but it was one where from the point that Port Adelaide hit the front in the second quarter, at least from my point of view, even when we did poke our nose back in front, there was just that gnawing feeling in the back of your mind that I didn't think we were going to win the game. I just didn't have that feel about it, that maybe they were more likely to take their chances than us. Did you sort of get that vibe? Or
I'm all gut feels when it comes to watching the Saints. I think the stats don't mean anything to me. And you're right. I watched the game a bit on delay a bit. And so that first quarter, I'm glad that I knew what the score was at halftime and then went back and watched the first quarter, because I think that would have set up some unrealistic expectations, because we looked on fire and we had a good connection and we were moving well. And like you said, Port Adelaide, they just seemed a bit fumbly, but then that all changed around. And I don't know. It was the easiest to swallow loss that I can think of in recent memory. Like, it stings because it would have been another feather in the cap that, we knocked off our bogey team. But at the same time, I think there's good losses and there's a lot to be learnt from losses. And I think that this is one of those games where we didn't lose too much in the actual result. We're up against what many believe will be a top 8 team who play a great contested game. And they sort of showed us the level we have to get to consistently. We got a reality check with Collingwood and we acquitted ourselves quite well. Carlton was exceptional. And I think now we've just come back to the pack a bit, which is good though. I think that's better. It sort of gives you a clearer vision of where you're at.
Yeah, I think certainly the Collingwood game hurt a little bit less. I agree with what you're saying. It wasn't a bad loss in that you weren't shattered, but it felt like there were slightly more missed chances in this game, whereas the Collingwood game, we were kind of scrambling to stay in it and made a really late dash, but it would have been a miracle to win it. Whereas obviously against Port, we hit the front in the last quarter. There was that key moment. I thought Jack Steele played a great game, but we kicked 2 in a row, hit the front, won a free kick in the middle for holding the ball. Then he got run down and it swung it back the other way. Obviously, Battle made 2 mistakes, the stepping off the line, and then in the second quarter, the 8-metre pass to Wilkie, and just little things like that where we let, I think it was Drew, free in the middle of the ground in the third quarter, which set up that Rioli goal. Kind of felt like it was just a few little things. But yeah, I think you summed it up, Nick, that it was kind of one good side losing a really tight game to another good side, and that sucks because you want to win them. But it didn't feel like, oh, geez, where did that come from? We played a shocker. It felt like we just didn't quite execute against a good team, and they just got us.
Well, there's all that discussion around the 5-day break, and I know statistically it doesn't sort of bear out that, we were covering the ground just as much as we have been, just as quickly as we have been. But having watched the replay, it's the things that they don't measure. It's the, you think about the way we've attacked, the contest tackling in groups, the way we do second and third efforts. And I think that is kind of where the 5-day break came into play. Just a little sharpness was taken off the edge. And I think that would also contribute to the mental fatigue that, Josh Battle and Cam. When was the last time you remember Cam Wilkie making a mistake? Yeah. Like, it just doesn't happen. And so I would just attribute that down to, like, it's just a little bit of mental fatigue. You can only stay so high for so long.
Yeah, I think it's a good point. I mean, look at the things that they did better than us. And like you mentioned, it was kind of those second, third efforts, those 1%ers, the tackles. And that certainly hurt. Like, you look at the impact that Jason Horne-Francis had in the second quarter. Like, he was so clearly best on ground in the second quarter that it wasn't even a competition. But just the things that they had over us, which was just, they were being a little cleaner with the ball. They looked after the ball. They kept possession just a little bit better than we did. They didn't have the bad turnovers that we had. I think the turnover numbers were about the same over the course of the game, but we had some bad ones. Obviously, you talked about those battle ones in D50, and I think Ross kind of referred to them in his press conference. That was probably the difference for the game, is those, you can turn over the ball in the middle, you can turn over the ball, in your forward line, but as soon as you turn it over in defensive 50 and you get a shot on goal, like that's a killer. And ultimately that's what killed us, is those little kind of decisions, the composure with the ball and potentially without the ball as well. They beat us in disposal efficiency. They beat us in efficiency inside 50 by quite a way, by 9%, which is doesn't sound like a lot, but it is a lot.
You feel like that stat is mostly made up of the last quarter, though, don't you? Yeah. Did you guys get flashback to the Richo years where it's like, what are we doing? They're just bombing it.
Well, or we'd win it back on the wing and kick it, like Mason would, I think, kick one straight to them, but to Burn Jones and a couple of others where, and maybe, I mean, who knows on the 5-day break? Because as I said, I think they were just better than us and we were still running. So I'm not the Port fans that listen to it, but I'm not offering that necessarily as an excuse. But I reckon it was probably the one time this year we've truly missed a focal point. Be it either Max King or even Caminiti with that big body. Because in the last quarter when we were frantically bombing it in, it was Finlayson who was behind the ball taking marks or one or two of their other players, and we just needed a contest. Probably one or two contests might have been enough there.
And Cordy was off the ground at that stage as well. I mean, just look at what Dixon was doing at the other end. He did not have a great game, but did two or three things that a big man does in the forward line, and he brought energy. Like he had that intimidation factor. Like you could see that we were second guessing ourselves when it was in the air when he was around. And I think, you're right. We just lacked that, Max. Well, it's a good thing we have a Max King type in the wings, but that's solely what we lacked.
Yeah, and it was just one or two of those little things which made it frustrating. And it is remarkable, this Port Adelaide record. We actually won the first 5 games we played against them. So the overall record is 24-11. So if you do the maths on that, it's 24-6. since we won the first 5. So, we always talk about how bad our record is against Essendon. Our record against Essendon is actually about 50-50. It's just they seem to beat us in annoying times, but we have a truly bad record against Port, and it's very frustrating. But I had a lot of people message me after it saying, "Oh, that was a great game. You're both playing finals and all of that sort of stuff." And to me, it was frustrating, but other people obviously thought that it looked like both sides were in pretty good shape. So obviously last year we were in this exact same position and it went pretty ordinary for us after that. But as we said last week, it just feels a bit different. There's just a bit more resilience. So
Ross's presser after the game, I think a lot of us were feeling the same way, frustrated, pissed off, missed opportunities. But God, it's nice having Dad back, isn't it?
Yeah.
He's just got a way of kind of deflating any kind of that Saints panic that we all have. And just sort of making it seem really simple. Yeah, it was like 4 defensive entry mistakes. There's things to work on. And then I thought it was a really great message to the players where he said they're just so coachable. Like that's Dad giving you a pat on the head and saying, it's all right, we'll get him next time. But it makes sense. Like, if he was saying get the ball deep, but, the players didn't really use enough kind of agency to say, well, if there's a target, like there's a dot after that bit of coaching.
It's a funny way of putting it, actually, because, my sort of routine this year, being a little bit busier, is that the day after a game, so I'll take the dog for a walk in the morning, and that's when I'll listen to the press conference just on my phone. And that was the case Saturday morning. I just thought I'll do the little debrief. And, I felt much better after the walk. It was almost like, yeah, thanks, Dad. You've reassured me now. You put my mind at ease. That's okay now. So very good.
Before we get to the good part, because I think there were some good points from the game as well and things that we should touch on. But you mentioned kind of the lack of that tall target and needing the Max King type or the Anthony Caminiti or whatever it is back. Are you guys surprised that we've gone in so far this season with just Rowan Marshall in the ruck and not have the ability to push him forward with Tom Campbell or someone kind of being that secondary ruck that can still contest in the middle of the ground and you can push Rowan forward. He can be that secondary target if we need. He can be the focal point if we need, like we needed late in the game with Cordy off. Are you surprised that we haven't gone in with a 2-ruck setup?
It's that age-old debate around Rowe that he's always been a much better player when he has it his own way. So when he gets to ruck, full momentum. But obviously when he played with Ryder, that was a really good combination with one going forward. So obviously Campbell and Heath aren't Ryder, so you'd be sacrificing a little bit in that combination if you put them together. But a little bit surprised, but in saying that, look, it's worked. I think Marshall's had a terrific year. I think he'd be top 3 in the BNF. But yes, I think for the reasons you stated, there might have been a temptation, particularly because memory for Caminiti is not quite like for like. Caminiti is a slightly bigger focal point. So that might have just changed things a little bit.
I just think the issue is Rowe's a victim of his own standards. And if you're going to bring in a second ruckman, when Rowe's resting forward or on the bench, that guy's got to cover the ground like a midfielder like Rowan does. And I just don't know that Tom Campbell, with all respect to Max Heath and Tom Campbell, I just don't know that they're aerobically up to it. And if you look at the way we're defending at the moment, like it is just a moving grid. And if you've got a guy who's lagging or, especially if it's the last quarter and, he's not running as hard, it could stuff up our entire structure, defensive structure.
I guess the thing that worries me, as well as not having that ability to push Marshall forward, is he's a beast. Around the ball, around
those
the ground.
Tackles.
Like his
Didn't he have like 4 tackles or something?
He's amazing. His ability to win the ball, but also contest and like you said, those tackles, like the way that he throws his entire body into a
to a guy who's 5'10".
Someone's gonna get really hurt.
He's not quite Mumford, and that he's not going to maim someone, but he's he's not far away.
No.
But I mean, it does feel a little bit like we've gone into 2 games the last couple of weeks against Collingwood. They had Billy Frampton as their number 1 ruck, and then last week against Port, where they didn't really have a recognised ruckman at all, and we haven't quite gotten that level right in the ruck that it should be an element that we dominate. And I know that we won the hit outs, but we didn't win. I don't think we won the hit outs to advantage. We certainly didn't use that advantage in personnel to our team advantage, if that makes sense. And I guess that's just another I guess idea around putting in that second ruckman that can really take advantage at the stoppages, and Rowan can still be that ground level beast, whether it's in the center of the ground or up forward. But I think that what we're seeing is that we have options, we have flexibility, and Rowan Marshall is clear, like you said, clearly probably top 5 best and fairest, probably higher than that at the moment. He's having a fantastic year, but it would be nice to see some more, I guess, traditional ruck production.
And interesting, obviously, this week he'll take on Todd Goldstein, but we'll take a look at the votes as a good segue out of that, looking to this week's game, and we'll talk a little bit later on about the personnel coming back soon and what that all means. But I actually gave Marshall 3. I thought he was clearly our best player. To get 26 possessions, 28 hit-outs, something like 10 tackles, multiple clearances, was a really influential player. Sinclair, as always, solid. He got 2 votes and 5 ones. An apology to Gresham, who I thought played his best game for the year. But I gave a vote to Clark. Massive last quarter as well. He had 10 and a goal in the last quarter to help keep us in it. I thought Owens was our most dangerous forward the whole way through the game. I thought Steele played pretty well despite making a couple of mistakes. I thought Wilkie was, again, solid, despite a couple of mistakes. And Wanganeen Miller, probably his most composed game for a while. So he gets a vote as well. Aaron's on holidays, so we'll slot his votes in later. But Nick, what have you got?
Pretty similar. I gave 2 to Marshall. I did think he was our best player. The only reason I couldn't give him all was kind of that we need some ruck dominance, and we're just not getting it in that particular element. But I thought he was our most impactful player around the ground. I have 1 vote to a bunch of guys like you, Steele, Jack Sinclair. I thought was great again. Mitch Owens was dynamic, and it didn't matter if he was in the forward line, if he was in the middle. They pushed him in the ruck in the second half as well, and I thought he was great. I mean, this guy's just going to be a star, and I love watching him already. Hunter Clark just keeps going from strength to strength and getting better every week, which is great to see, and kind of goes back to that discussion we've had over the last 2 years, that this kid just needs continuity. He just needs to play every week, and he's going to be a really good player. Cal Wilkie, I thought, redeemed himself after potentially his worst game in Saints colours last week, the week before against Carlton. Jade Gresham, like you said, really good signs. I think his best game in quite a while, 5 inside 50s and 8 score involvements, and just really busy around the ground, down forward, kept running. Looked like he is starting to lower his eyes a little bit when he's got the ball in hand as well, and not just blaze away, which is promising. And Mason Wood was just solid again. So a vote to Mace. Charlie?
Well, I hate to be pedantic, Nick, but that adds up to 9 votes. You've got 1 on the table. Are you just saving that? Is that a holdover?
I think you gave Steele 2, but you credited him with 1.
5, 6, 7, 8. I did 2. 2 to Marshall and Steele. No, you're right. 2 to Marshall and Steele, and then 1 to the rest.
Okay, great. All right. Just want to make sure we don't want any controversy at the end of the year when you hand out the prestigious.
When Steele and Marshall tie and that vote matters.
Exactly. Much like you guys, I thought Rowan Marshall was the best on ground. I thought Jack Sinclair does Jack Sinclair things. He's sort of in that Steele category now, where it's like he has a 30-touch game, and you're like, oh, yeah, maybe I'll give him a point. I thought Jake Gresham, like in the same way Charlie Dixon was the sort of fire starter, Jake Gresham and Hunter Clark, but I thought Gresh almost won the game for us. Like he just looked incredibly dangerous in that last quarter, and I just love the way he has responded to the criticism, that he's had the last few weeks. I still saw him like screaming for handballs and stuff, but at least he was celebrating teammates' goals. So I think that's really, he just, look, for all his flaws, he's a very unique player.
Yes.
And I think he's hard to match up against. Like, whether he's in the midfield or whether he's in the forward line, like I think he's worth persisting with. And I'm willing to take, a few sort of drawbacks, Stevie J style, or Milne style even, going for something ambitious, not pulling it off for the moments of magic you get. 1 to Steele, 1 to Clark, who I'm just so excited to see, what he can do. He's so laconic in his style and those loping kind of steps. You sort of feel like everything's laconic with him. It's sort of, he's like the cat in the hat. He's just got this body that sort of bends in all directions, but he's so hard at it. And again, he really almost got us across the line. Mitch Owens, how quickly have we just taken it for granted that Mitch Owens will reliably, take 3 contested marks and kick 2 goals a game, and he hasn't even played 20 games. The kid is awesome. Like he's so exciting to watch, and I just sort of felt like he just rarely gets beaten. But I did notice that even his second efforts were a bit off, which is a real kind of, I think that if there's a bellwether for the side, then if Mitch Owens isn't like going for 3 or 4, efforts in a contest, then something's wrong. And then Naz, who I think is just, he's just bubbling along nicely. I think he's going to have a massive game soon, but he did some really great things.
It's amazing you talk about Mitch Owens in that way. It is amazing that we look to a second year player who played 6 games last year, and that when we're struggling in some area of the ground, we're like, oh, yeah, Mitch there, and he's just a star. Like it's like we're not winning the hard ball in the middle. Mitch will go in the middle. He also has he'll win a hard ball.
He's got the face of a 10-year-old, and he looks just so happy to be out there. Like,
but I remember
on the other podcast, Will said he's a bit like the dude in Shazam. Like he's just like a kid with a grown-up body and can just do all these amazing things, just loving being a superhero.
But in that third quarter, when he the start of the third quarter when he kicked that goal, I remember we obviously hadn't scored for ages and it was frustrating and we were picking dumb options, and I can't remember who it was, ran inside 50 and I'm like, why isn't he having a shot? And he's chipped it up to a 1-on-3 or something with Owens and screaming at the TV, and then Owens has taken the mark in the pack and you're like, oh, it's fine, Mitch has got it, he's taken the mark, and he sort of got us out of trouble a few times. And it's just one of those things that you shouldn't be able to rely on him to do.
They look to him now as the outlet kid, which is really interesting because when King comes back and we can maybe move Membry up a bit more, then we have like Mason Wood, Mitch Owens, Tim Membry as 3 outlet kicks. If you put them across the ground, like it's really, really mouth-watering.
It is.
Fingers crossed.
Our next special guest, we've spoken to a couple from this era that's St Kilda's side of the early 90s. One of those we spoke to was Gordon Fode last week. We now turn our attention to a player that did a number of roles, tagging, back pocket, through the middle, did heaps of sort of 1%er, no-nonsense type jobs for a number of coaches, and that is Kain Taylor.
Devonport, the youngster, comes to the members' side, where the fans are situated. Nearly the mark to Harding. It is a mark. And he's played his heart out. Plays on quickly. Gives a hand pass to Laurie. Laurie's kick. Lowe can't mark. But precious seconds are wasted as Lowe takes it over the boundary line. Morrissey coming on. Platten being taken off. What a rare occurrence.
Well, I think he hurt himself a few moments ago, but Kain Taylor has done a great job on it. 13 seconds left and counting down. Jenky's off. He's off. He handballs into the space. It could be very costly. Anderson, what can he do? 2 seconds. It could be over. It's over. Victory to the Saints.
What a game.
Our special guest this week is Kain Taylor, recruited from Dingley, played 76 games for the Saints from the mid-80s through until the mid-90s. I think had 4 coaches by my count, possibly more over that journey, such was the changing nature of times with the Saints. But started in 86 under Graham Jelly, obviously Darryl Baldock. There would have been Alan Davis in there briefly, then obviously Kenny Sheldon and into Big Stan at the end of that in 1994. But Kain, thanks for jumping on with us this week.
No. Great to join you guys.
Going back to the start, I'm always curious when players were zoned to clubs. Obviously, St Kilda had a rough run through the late 70s and early 80s. Did you know all along that if I make a fist of this football career, that's where I'm going to go? It's just inevitable that that's going to be home if I make it?
Look, I think originally when I was at Dingley, Dingley's zone was Melbourne. Okay. So there was always, I guess, a belief that if I was going to get in at some stage, it would be through Melbourne Football Club. But I received a call through John Beveridge many years ago now, and I was asked to come down and train with the under-19s at St Kilda. So took that opportunity and. Ended up staying there for the remainder of my VFL AFL career.
Kain, talking about Johnny Beveridge, what does that process look like? I mean, we've spoken to a lot of people that have their own stories about Johnny Beveridge and that sort of thing, but how did that work for you and what was that process like?
Yeah, look, well, there was a recruiter that had come down and watched a game at Dingley, and he'd obviously passed on some recommendations. I received a call from John, and I think at the time I was only I think I was 16. Would have been in year 10 at school still. So I was a little bit unsure what to expect. Went down, had a training run, and trained for a couple of weeks there, and then went back to Dingley and got a call about 2 weeks later saying, look, we'd really like you to come back and have a run in the under-19s. So I went back and played a game. I think my first game was out at Victoria Park against Collingwood, and I performed reasonably well there, and was asked to stay on for the remainder of the year.
Yeah, it was fascinating when we talk about those various stories about how different the game was then to now, obviously, when everybody sits around and watches drafts and those sorts of things. It had a bit more of that suburban footy feel, I imagine, where you'd get invited down to train, as you say, and then get invited to stay on. Can you take us through the process of 86 and getting that debut against the Kangaroos? You kicked a couple of goals in that game and stayed in the side for about the next month, which obviously would have been a good boost for the confidence.
Yeah. Look, I think the big difference now is that they have the development squads, and they have the Stingrays and those type of clubs, which I guess you don't have that feeling of belonging like we had back when we had under-19s based around clubs. So when I went down to St Kilda, I really felt part of the club, and I think that's probably the challenge more for the younger kids these days, going through that same system. But, look, I spent a couple of years, I spent the next full season playing under-19s. I played under-19s in that first season and actually did my shoulder and ended up getting a reconstruction when I was 17. At the end of that season, we played in a final against Hawthorn out at Waverley in the under-19s, and then so spent the next season in the under-19s. And the following year, I did a pre-season with the senior group. Played the first 2 games, I think, in the under-19s, and then was asked to come and play a couple of reserve games. I think I played 3 reserve games, and then it was it's probably a little bit different to what happens nowadays, where they get your parents on the phone and ring them up and make a bit of a hoo-ha of it. I think it might have been Paul Tomei or someone who said, "Oh, I think you might have been picked this week." And anyway, sure enough, I listened to one of the programs, and I think I found out through that in my first game, and then got a call the next day from Graham Jelly. So very, very different process back there. But look, it was a massive thrill. I played my first game against North Melbourne, as you said, under lights at the MCG, and was lucky enough to kick a few goals and perform okay.
Kain, so in 1990, that's when you really sort of cemented your place in the team. You played 17 games. There was one game in particular I want to talk about, which was round 6 versus the Hawks at Moorabbin, because this is the moment I think I really fell in love with the Saints. I've been going, but I just remember the atmosphere at Moorabbin at the time, having not beaten Hawthorn since 1979. And you played a role shutting down Johnny Platten. Can you just take us through your memories of that game?
Yeah, look, I do. I remember I was playing, predominantly tagging roles back then, and played on Johnny Platten that day. I think I'd played on Dacos and Craig Bradley and the like. So, was getting used to doing a lot of running. But I think that day out at Moorabbin there, it was a full house, and after the game, we and I can't remember exactly how much we won by, but getting over the line and having the crowd
3
run
points.
on the game, I remember I was quite exhausted, and trying to get off the ground was a challenge in itself back then, because you just had supporters and that were that happy with what had occurred, and trying to get back to the race was, as I said, a bit of a challenge when you were just trying to get a bit of air back in the lungs. But look, it was an amazing atmosphere playing at Moorabbin. Something that I'll always cherish. That ground and the supporters, and when we did perform well there, there was nothing like it.
87, you changed your jumper number from 54 to 26. What brought that about, and did you have any say in what that number went to, or did they just give you at the start of the season? They just gave you the number and said, "Get on with it."
Yeah, no, look, I think they were the jumper I got in the first year was number 54. I think they were running out of jumpers there, so that was one that I got handed in my first year, and then obviously the next season they allocated the jumpers, and I think Daryl Cunningham had just finished up Fader. He'd been wearing number 26, so I was and look, I had a lot of respect for Daryl. And Joffa, his brother, and was more than happy to take on number 26. And look, I wore that out throughout the rest of my playing career.
Looking at that 87 season, as a young player, could you sense the change that was unfolding? Obviously, Darryl Baldock came back to the club. You had Plugger have that unbelievable breakout year with a Brownlow and a Coleman. Nicky Winmar arrived at the club. You had young players like Burke and Lowe who had arrived as well. Was there a feeling that something was brewing and that would lead to what happened in the early 90s with the club playing finals?
Yeah, probably. Personally, not so much for me at that stage. I think, one of the challenges, and I think it's for all young players coming through, and having played my first game when I was 18, probably emotionally whether you're ready to deal with, I guess playing with grown men, and football back then was probably, you didn't have the supportive structure around you that they've got nowadays. So, it probably took me a few years to learn how to deal with that. And so I think, if I'm honest, I look back and I go, I really struggled in those early periods under Baldock. But look, obviously playing around guys like Lockett and Winmar, Frawley, Lowe, Burke, Harvey, Grant. There were some amazing names, and you could just see that there was something starting to develop. And by the time Kenny Sheldon came on board, I think we really had a good, strong belief that we could, I guess, change the direction of where the club had been for so many years. And start playing finals again. And so, when we were able to make finals in that first year in '91, that was a really big thrill. And probably, I guess, we talk about it as a group every now and then when we get together and say, it's probably one of those ones that could have been if we'd have got through that first game, because I think that year '91 was a final six, and we finished third that year, and I think Hawthorn and West Coast played off in that grand final, and I think we'd beaten both those sides relatively comfortably through the year. So I think there was not having played finals for a long period of time, and we got a couple of injuries through that game that probably cost us, and I think we got beaten by 7 points in the end by Geelong.
Kain, you mentioned before that, you had to play these tagging roles, so you had to learn how to run. There's running, and then there's Rob Harvey running. What was it like, seeing Rob Harvey build his tank? Because you would have seen him arrive as an 18-year-old. We've heard stories, but what was your impression of his running capacity?
Yeah, well, look, we probably didn't realise until sort of, maybe 3-4 years down the track that I guess how impressive this young kid was, because he used to actually do a lot of his training and that, I guess, out of sight of the club. So he would finish a training session on a Thursday night and he'd go and do a 10K run after that around the streets of Moorabbin, and the physios and medical staff used to have to jump in their car and go looking for him, because they were concerned about he'd had a few soft tissue injuries and things like that. So he was probably overtraining. But I've done a little bit of coaching with the juniors and that, and I quite often use halves as an example of I guess the key ingredient at that level, and it's hard work. And I don't think I've ever seen anyone work harder than Robert Harvey on the training track. He trained exactly as he played, and just pushed himself to the limits.
Kain, I guess just off the back of that question, someone else who I think people are so interested in, because had this perception of who he was on the field and was so quiet off it in Plugger, that not a lot of people know the real Plugger. What are your memories and I guess what was your perspective of being, behind closed doors with Tony Lockett?
Look, I think to this date, Tony still shies away from, I guess, the limelight, and it's not something that's ever sat well with him. So, yeah, I guess the all the hype that went around with, I guess, the extraordinary player that he was a very different person behind closed doors. I personally had a very good relationship with Plugger and got along really well with him. He was very humorous. He loved having a joke and and a bit of fun and a good time. He was a wild character back in those early days. There's no doubt about that. But certainly he matured and his football just went from bigger and better things, obviously it was, I guess, tragic losing him to the Swans, but I think it's something that probably had to happen for his career to, I guess, and what he ended up achieving.
Describe 92, 93, 94, I guess those last few years of your career. You played sort of about half the years in 93 and 94, obviously missed a fair chunk of 92. You played a crucial game late in the season against Melbourne, which we had to win to make the finals, and we did that. But I guess your reflections being sort of in and out of the side over that period.
Yeah, look, in 92 I had a groin injury where I missed about 12 weeks, and the first week back that I came back and played, I re-injured it. And back then, I guess probably they dealt with things a little bit differently medically than what they do nowadays. And I was then put straight in and had an operation, hernia repair, and that done, and was back playing within 4 weeks. So, I probably missed a good 16 weeks of that 92 season, and then was able to play a few reserve games, break back into the senior side in the last game of the year, and only to be dropped for the final. I think Gilbert McAdam came back in and replaced me in that game. But look, I look back now, and I think back then, as disappointed as I was, I understand now I was probably underdone, having missed so much football during the year. And a player like Gilbert was probably the obvious choice to take into a final with, I guess, the X factor that he had.
Kain, I want to take you to 93, and obviously in the last, I guess, couple of weeks, we've heard a lot about it, given the 30-year anniversary of Nicky Winmar's stand and that Winmar McAdam performance at Vic Park. What are your memories of that day? I know you weren't in the senior squad for that game. Were you playing in the reserves game before that, or were you there that day? Like, what are your memories of that period?
Yeah, look, I'm pretty sure I'd either played in the reserve game or I was injured. But look, I guess Victoria Park was just one of those grounds where it was it could be quite intimidating. And I won't go into the detail of the Collingwood supporters and what they used to do and that, but as you were walking in and out of the races, but it was one of those grounds where, as I said, could be quite intimidating for the team to win on that day in the way that they did, and for Nicky to obviously lift up his jumper, because of, I guess, some of the taunts and things that he'd received. It's obviously an extremely iconic moment now in history, and one that's probably changed the course of the way that people think and deal with these situations. So look, I think it's a very proud moment, I guess, looking back from a teammate's perspective, because he took a stand and it's certainly made a big difference with the way that things are dealt with these days.
Now, obviously, Danny Frawley had a huge influence, no doubt, during your time as captain over that period. And tragically, obviously, we lost him a few years ago. The club have been, paying respects to his legacy with camps up around Bungaree and Ballarat in recent times. And a lot of past players have had the chance to speak to the group. And I understand you've had that opportunity. And what's that been like, obviously, being able to get back and reflect on those memories?
Yeah, look, we spent a lot of time up in Ballarat, and Spud was a very close mate, and we got some amazing memories with him and up around that area. So to go back to to Bungaree, where we spent a lot of time on his farm and around that area was pretty special, and to be able to talk to, I guess, the current playing group now about what he meant to us and I guess how special he was and the legacy that he left. It was a great opportunity to be able to relay that to them, and I think the group was really appreciative of myself and David Grant that the day I was there, being able to relay that message. And so, yeah, look, I mean, we still miss Danny every function we have. It's one of those situations where he's the type of person he was. You just keep expecting he's going to walk in the door at any stage, and with his big smile, and he'd have some practical joke up his sleeve. But unfortunately, that doesn't happen anymore. But we loved him dearly, and he has left an amazing legacy at that club.
Kain, 1994, obviously the club was going through a bit of a transition period. Obviously, Plugger was leaving the footy club. And round 19 was a loss against Brisbane at Waverley. It was your final game. Did you know that was going to be the end of the AFL road for you? And I guess your career since then, you've had a pretty successful local footy career since then.
Yeah, look, I mean, I had no idea. And I think this is one of the things as a young player is that you think it's going to go on forever. But I look back and again at the time when Stan Alves had said that they were they weren't going to require me during the next season, I was extremely disappointed. But again, I probably look back now, and in hindsight, I understand the decisions that had been made then. I'd been around for quite a number of years. I'd had a number of injuries. I hadn't sort of played full seasons, so it was probably a logical choice for Stan to make at that point in time, based on him coming in and I guess putting his stamp on the club and moving into that next phase. But look, extremely disappointing. But I was very lucky that when I finished there, I went on to a club, the Springvale Scorpions, which was in the VFL, VFA back then, and was lucky enough to play 5 years there and played in 4 premierships over that period. So I guess that allowed me to walk away from football feeling relatively satisfied with, I guess, the success that I'd had, and I was lucky enough to captain 3 of those. So it was a nice way to finish my football career, I guess.
So we've asked this question of every guest that we've had on this season, particularly given it's the Saints 150. As a final one from me, reflecting on the 150 years, from your point of view, what does St Kilda mean to you? What comes to mind when you, I guess, when you're asked and when you think back about St Kilda?
Yeah, look, I mean, I'm probably as passionate about the club now as I was when I was playing. I go on, I watch, each game at the moment. I get along to every game that I can. I've got a young 18-year-old that, loves coming along and watching with me. So, as far as passion goes, it's still there. There's no doubt that there's still a passion for the club. It's been one of those clubs, and it's quite amazing that the camaraderie and the, I guess, playing group that has stuck together over the years, based on the limited success that we've had, is quite amazing. We have a really, really good past players group, and run by Sean Ralphsmith now at the moment, and we had a function on Friday night where we all catch up and then go and watch the game and that together. So, although we didn't have premierships and reunions and things like that to celebrate, we still regularly celebrate our time together. And I think that's probably, I guess the special thing for me about the St Kilda Football Club is that they've always been a very strong bonded group of people that have been involved, from players to officials to coaches to to everyone, to supporters.
Kain, you were a great part of a fun time for the Saints as they were growing through that late 80s and into the early 90s, made a terrific contribution to the club. Love to hear the passion in past players like that, and thank you very much for joining us this week.
Appreciate your time, guys. Really good to chat with you.
Kain Taylor, a 76-game Saint. We turn our attention to North Melbourne back in the Sunday twilight slot. St Kilda do play, or Sandringham play reserves at Arden Street just before that game as well, so a chance for fans to sort of catch the double. But look, we know the expectations going into this game would be that St Kilda would bounce back. They'd be both internal and external expectations. North Melbourne started quite well this year. Obviously, they won their first couple against both the Western Australian teams who are clearly struggling, but the win against Fremantle in Perth in particular was full of merit. Obviously, their last 5 weeks, they've slipped back to the pack, as is evidenced by their percentage sitting at 66.5. They're 15th on the table. Heavy defeats to Melbourne last week, Gold Coast the week before. Brisbane have also got them in recent times as well. So obviously Luke Davies-Uniacke, who missed last week, is a very important player for them. So if he plays, that bolsters them. But look, it feels like we've got enough to have them covered. But in saying that, they've played some reasonable football in patches. You look at their Good Friday game against Carlton, where they were very competitive. But I think the expectation, Charlie, would be that we find a way to right the ship and bank the points and get to 6-2.
If this was last year, or basically any year post 2012, I would probably be going, "Oh God, like we're going to drop. This is a danger game." But I feel comfortable with what's going to happen, whether or not it's a percentage boost or whatever. I'm not even thinking about that. But Ross will not let this one get away from us. Like, whether we grind it out and win by a goal, that I'm totally fine with that. I just think it's important that we regroup, and because like I said, this is of days gone by, a classic danger game. They've got a master coach. They've been smashed in the media this week. I mean, Kane Corns is doing us no favours by writing an article every 3 days leading up to this game. I mean, I know we're going to get to that, so St Kilda, but this has all the makings of that.
Yeah, I think that's a fair summary, Nick. I think, as Charlie said, normally you'd be more worried than we are. Whether that's a false dawn, I don't know, but I sort of agree with that sentiment that you feel like we'll handle it.
I don't know. I don't know if it's that comfort that will handle it. I think it's more, like we spoke about earlier around, I guess the understanding of where we're at and having dad back in the building, like you said before, Charlie, like I'm just comfortable with where we're at. And it doesn't mean, we've said it ad nauseum over the last kind of 6 or 7 weeks. It doesn't guarantee wins, but you can see that this team is going in the right direction. You can see by the way they line up, by the way they compete, they attack the ball, they attack the man, that they are doing the things that they need to be doing. Doesn't mean they're going to win every game, but we're getting closer to that point that we were at 15 years ago, where we were becoming not just a competitive team, but a dominant team. And the hallmarks of this team are similar in the contested ball, in kind of slowing down and making smart decisions. Doesn't always happen. We've got a young team and an inexperienced team. We're missing a lot of guys. We know that. But I feel like I'm just more comfortable with where we're at, that even going back to last week, and that the last few minutes were frustrating. The last quarter was frustrating. But 2 minutes after the final siren, I was like, it's okay. Like, I can see where we're going, and I'm okay with that. We're going to drop some games here and there. We've won some games that we probably shouldn't have won, or that we didn't expect to win. On the flip side, we are going to lose some games that you probably expect to win. But I'm okay with that, and I have faith that the building blocks are being put in place now for the next 5 or 6 year challenge. That I'm okay. Like, obviously, I want to come in and I want to smash North because other teams smash North and they're a rabble at the moment. But I don't feel like we have to. Like, we have to win. If we want to play finals, you have to win games like this. But I don't feel like for our future, like we're so reliant on beating North anymore. I don't know. It's just a weird feeling.
Think back to like, the mirage of last year and the wins we had in the first, 8 rounds. And, people saying, how is this different? Well, it's different in how we play. Like it's different in how we've got our wins. And what you're talking about, Nick, I think is there's a consistency of effort and performance that you expect to see each week. So if you're looking at your opponent and you're like, okay, well, they are here on the ladder. If we bring that consistency of effort, then we should win. Now we come up against a better team or a team that's around us on the table, then it's a 50-50. But I know what you're talking about. It's that, you feel like when you turn on the TV or at the game or whatever, you know what you're going to see from each line in the team.
Yeah, and you're less worried about watching for that reason, as you say. Like you look forward to watching them play because you're like, okay, they're going to bring what they need to bring. The intensity and effort will be there, and hopefully you get the result. I mean, it felt like against Collingwood that we didn't deserve to win the game because they'd outplayed us, but we just kept coming. And against Port Adelaide, it felt like it's a weird one that we didn't deserve to win, but in a lot of ways we should have, only because we just kept hanging around and created opportunities. And a lot of people have said, the hallmark of St Kilda is they'll be hard to beat. And I think that was evidenced in those two games because we looked beaten, but we were hard to beat and hung in there and gave ourselves a chance. And that's going to keep us competitive enough to have a good year and hopefully play finals and build from there. So, there is that trust that feels like it means something now. It's not like the Essendon game last year where we thought we could trust and then they ripped our heart out and, we took us all year to recover from that. It doesn't feel like there's one of them in them.
You mentioned kind of that knowing what the expectations are and knowing what you're going to see when you turn the TV on or when you walk into the ground. And, to their credit, like there's a lot of detractors for Andrew Bassett and Simon Lethlean around the decision that happened late last year with Rats and whatever. But the message has been from day one that we want supporters and members to know what to expect and to know what they're going to see each week when they watch a game of footy, that the players are going to turn up, they're going to be ready to go, they're going to be prepared, they're going to be structured and disciplined. And like you said, we're going to be hard to beat. And so far, that's what we've seen. So, I think we're in a decent spot.
So the word out of the club in terms of the injury, so reasonable chance that Zach Jones plays VFL this week for Sandy. Webster, I think, will be available. Whether they pick him in the 2s or the 1s, you'd sense a run at Sandy would be on offer for him. Then you look at, obviously, Caminiti's a week away, and Josh Gavalik, who's been pretty good with his mail, says that Max King likely to be available next week. Now, we ran a poll on social as to how you approach that. So next week is a rejuvenated Adelaide. Admittedly, they had a really tough loss on Sunday, but a rejuvenated Adelaide at the Adelaide Oval as to whether you bring him back or whether a player of Max's standing has to go through the reserves. It feels foreign to put a player through that, but at the same time, first up, Interstate, Cauldron, good team. I know we kicked 6 there last year. But look, we'll probably talk about that more on next week's podcast. But what's your gut feel on how we would manage Max's return?
I don't know. The overall sentiment from listeners and with that poll on Twitter was that majority want him straight back into the ones, and I understand the want to see him back in the ones. But we're not talking Jack Steele, who's missed 3 weeks or 4 weeks. We're talking Max King, who really hasn't played a legitimate game of football since the end of last season. He played, obviously, match sim early in the season. The last game of football that he played was a match sim in February. This is he's been a long time out of the game, and he's going to be rusty.
And shoulders hard to come back from at the best of times.
It is. And to get that feel again, especially when your arms and marking power is such a big part of his game. Like he's got to be confident in his own ability to move those arms and all those sorts of things, which you can do on the track, but it's not the same as getting out there in a game against a fullback and that sort of stuff. And I just think from what Ross has been showing us, like there is selection integrity. And I feel like, to bring back a guy who hasn't played in kind of 12 weeks, would just send the wrong message to the rest of the team that you need, like everybody needs to earn their spot. We've seen guys, Jack Billings, who historically would be, best 22 every week. has got to bide his time in the twos. And there's a bunch of guys that have had to come back through the twos. And I don't see Ross saying, well, screw that for you, Max King. You're coming straight back into the ones. I just feel like there's at least a week for Sandy there.
I think that if you listen to that press conference again with Ross, he's using very selective language. Like he talks about Max and he says that, he's a great player, but I haven't seen that much of him. I don't know him that well. For me, that is code for, well, I have to see what I've got here and I'm not going to, roll the dice and just throwing him straight back in. And it just seems logical. Just let him play 2 quarters in the reserve. If he gets through that and he plays 3 quarters or a full game and just let him build up to it. Like Caminiti was doing a good job. We were 4 weeks ago, the debate we were having is how do we fit Max King into the side? Like, does it upset the apple cart? I don't think we need to panic now and rush. He is a generational player and could be the key to so much for our future. Let's not turn him into like another Cozzy where we just, injure him too early. Like, let's just take our time while we can. It's still early enough in the season that I think, and we have a Caminiti and Tim Membry's back. I just don't see the point in risking it.
And Nick, you mentioned Billings briefly there. I wouldn't be stunned if he was a sub this week. I think there's an outside chance they might go down that path. Obviously, Bytel, there was no Sandy last week, unfortunately, but obviously Bytel coming off a blinder the week before would be a chance. Windhager has been the sub a couple of games in a row, so he either has to play or not play, if that makes sense. You've either got to pick him outright or send him back to Sandy. I don't think you can sub him 3 weeks in a row. So to me, it would be Billings or Bytel maybe into that sub role. A few questions before we get to the awards and wrap up. Bobber asking, does the Poo need a rest in the twos? We had that conversation last week, ironically, and it was probably the most tired he's looked, to be honest. So whether
almost
they...
took a couple of hangers. Like he's very close to taking a couple of hangers.
Yeah, and unfortunately, he's a beautiful set shot at goal. I don't know what he was doing at the start of the second quarter when he tried to go the hero around the body thing. Yeah. A big moment in retrospect too, because we would have gone 4 goals up at that point. But a few others, Tim asking a similar question, whether we persist with Cordy for one more if Max isn't ready, or if you go, Nick, as you say, with the second ruckman. My gut feel is I'll stick with what has worked. Not that Cordy,
Ross has mentioned him in every press conference. Yeah.
Although you can't be getting one possession, I must admit. And look, I'll defend Cordy because he's being played out of position and he's fighting hard, but you probably got to give a little bit more than that.
He's been, to his credit, he has been an important part of the structure. And I think what Ross has been saying is that he's kind of sacrificed his own game to allow guys like Butler and Higgins to play more of their natural game. Which is, if he's playing his role, then that's all you can ask. But it is interesting to see a guy have one touch of the ball and then get mentioned in the presses, like you said. But we
found our Zach Dawson again.
Yeah. Well, it's cuddly. It's cuddly.
He's
Ross,
an oversized
right?
Robert Eddy, I think. That's more what he's like.
It's cuddly Ross. He's throwing credit, where it's due. He mentions every assistant coach, every press conference he mentions Zane Cordy.
Probably not going to mention Nick Walsh, though, I would have sense.
No, probably not at this stage.
Jack asking the question, what's our best forward line look like with all players available? And, we'll give a link to your mob, Nick, zerohanger.com.au. There's a pick your team there and have a look. We could pick it a million different ways. It's going to have 2 smalls, or at least 3 or 2 or 3 smalls, Higgins, Butler, Gresham, and then King, Membry, and one other in that lineup.
I guess the question there is what happens when all those guys are there? Yeah. What happens with Filippo and Owens? Because you can't drop them.
Exactly.
But they're also not taking up those forward spots. Do they take someone else's role in the middle?
Yeah, exactly. Owens, at the moment playing kind of as a second ruckman, but it then brings us sort of to another question. I'll ask both of you if it was the schoolyard, and because Graham Smith asks this, the former South African captain, he says, who is higher on the pecking order out of these two? So if these two guys were both fully fit and standing up against the wall in the schoolyard, are you picking Caminiti or Hayes? Jack Hayes, that is.
That's a really good versus, because we've probably seen the same sample size of both, haven't we?
Hayes does more ruck work generally.
Yeah, I just worry. Yeah. I think, in fact, Nick and I we were having a WhatsApp chat earlier today, and I was saying that like Caminiti as an athlete, he's more of that kind of, streamlined, covers the ground well. Like he doesn't look, for a young player, he has not looked tired at the end of any game. He looks like he could go another
Well,
two.
he was a midfielder for a decade,
Right.
kind of before he got drafted. I think he kind of shot up and became a key forward.
And my impression of Hayes was that he had endurance, but he wasn't particularly quick. So I think it would just depend on how they fit into this game plan. My instinct says Caminiti at this stage, just because
I think it depends on the role.
Yeah.
Well, but they're all role players.
Caminiti's more that pure forward.
Yeah.
Caminiti's more that pure forward. Hayes is more that bigger body that like crashes and bashes and can go in the ruck for a.
But I don't want to take Owens out of the ruck. I mean,
No.
he's awesome.
I love him.
Yeah.
He's doing so well. He had like 4 hit outs.
It's great to see a 190 centimeter dude just run over the top of these 7-footers in the ruck.
And it helps his forward craft. I think you go into the middle, you get involved, and you go back forward. It's good for him, I think, in all aspects of his game. The final,
So to answer is we don't have
no. Again, horses for courses, maybe, but I mean, Jack Hayes had another setback, unfortunately. With I don't know how you do a hammy when you can't walk as it stands, but
well, that's like how did Dan McKenzie do a calf when he was concussed?
Yeah, exactly. It's like, what are you doing? You should be on the track, but now he's like. Someone mentioned that you could create a Frankenstein out of the working parts of Dan McKenzie and Jack Hayes and just see what you can come up with there. But
McKenzie, I like it. Like a number 54 on him and get him playing.
Then we look at the Jason Blake Award. I'm probably going to give it to this. I don't think I've ever done it the same guy 2 weeks in a row, but I think I will this time. Liam Stocker had him in our best at 3/4 time. He had a pretty quiet last quarter, but I think he does most things right. His ball use is pretty good. Defensive effort sound, and he's been a really valuable inclusion. And unheralded, we haven't mentioned him yet, which is exactly what this award is about. Charlie, do you have one for us?
The Jason Blake Award, this is my quarterly year Jason Blake Award is Seb Ross. Like, I just think his efforts not just in terms of his performance, but his leadership, like he's so vocal out on the ground. And I just think that he's got this new lease of life with Ross, and you watch the replay and he's involved in everything, and he's trying to break the lines and he's really given everything until the end. I think there is still that section of Saints fans who just don't like Seb and they probably will never like Seb, but I think you're not watching the games if you hate him this year because he's doing everything.
Yeah, I'll die on that hill. He's been terrific. Yeah.
I agree. They were the two that I had noted down. I was going to give whichever one you guys did the same thing. But I've given it to Liam Stocker before a couple of weeks in a row early in the season. So I agree about Seb. I think he's kind of playing career best footy in a different role that he's spent most of his career playing. And it is like a breath of fresh air to see him running around doing his thing. I think his disposal efficiency is the highest it's been in a long time. His running ability, it looks like he's running on top of the ground, and he's a really vocal member of the team as well. Like, we know that he's been a leader of a bad team for a long time, but now it's he's a senior member of what is looking like it's a much better team, and if not a good team, and it's really not. Like, I actually really enjoy watching Seb Ross play and looking like he's having fun.
Without having the stats in front of me, I'd hazard a guess Seb Ross has captained St Kilda more than anyone currently on our list. So that includes Jack Steele and Wilkie, because he was fill-in captain for Geary, who missed like 2 years. He would have captained 40 odd times, I reckon. Seb Ross won't be credited as a St Kilda captain, unfortunately, but he's done it a lot over the journey. Nick, to avoid you having your thunder stolen, you can go first with the Shannon Knoll Award.
There's interesting one. I'm going to go Ben Patton here, and I don't like doing it because I like the roles that Ben Patton plays for us, but I just feel like the last couple of weeks he's let those standards slip, and we know that he was a real lockdown small defender for a period of time. He had that really bad broken leg, and he hasn't quite been the same player ever since then. But it did feel like the first month of the season that he'd been rejuvenated under Ross in that kind of extra wingman type, running halfback, running wingman type role, and had spent all summer training with the midfield group. So it did feel like a different Ben Patton. But I do feel like in the last couple of weeks that we've seen a bit of those old habits die hard, kind of poor decisions, not really watching, some awareness issues. And I just feel like if he can clean a few of those things up, then he can be a really important part of the squad. And I just wanted to.
He'd be getting nervous seeing Jimmy Webster's.
I think so.
On the injury list, the week's getting shorter because I think that spot's up for grabs.
I think so.
I mean, I like Ben Patton,
right.
but I think Jimmy Webster brings the same, if not more, than him.
That's right. And I think the other one, that just a special shout out to those Saints fans that booed Jason Ward-Francis on the weekend. I think just lift. I don't think we need to say any more about it, but just get better.
Yeah, it's unfortunately it's that sheep mentality we've seen. We saw it earlier in the year with Collingwood when they played them, and you hear one person do it, and it's like, oh yeah, fair enough, but it's just dumb. Doesn't serve any purpose. Makes us look a bit silly, and could have done without it. Yeah, that's right.
So
exactly.
If the goal was to put him off his game, well, it didn't work. So maybe rethink that strategy next time.
Booing our midfield structure maybe. But Charlie, which way did you go?
So this is going to be controversial because he hasn't had much of an opportunity, but I really think that Windy, I think what happens is he comes on and he plays the role. And so, but we know from last year that he can be electric, and he's just he's a super athlete and he's got like amazing awareness and stuff. And maybe it's the way he's been deployed, but I just would like to see him come on and just like be the game changer, whether that's in the midfield or as a pressure forward or something, because he's got all the capability in the world. But if that's not going to happen, then I think he needs a run in the twos, just because, he's been overtaken by Mitch Owens this year in terms of like the excitement around the youth, and he's a gun and he needs to get like back into the starting lineup. And if he has to go back to the twos to find a bit of touch and get a bit of confidence back, then I think that should happen. Yeah.
100%.
Yep. No, I think that's spot on. Mine is a guy, and I feel sort of bad giving it to him. And I mentioned something.
We all feel bad. Yeah, maybe you should not do this award. We'll apologise before giving this one out. Like, you designed the show, guys. You can remove this award anytime you want. True.
I mentioned this guy on Twitter, and a few Saints fans went to his defence, and I can understand why, because he's a genuine match winner, and I think he's a very good player. But Jack Higgins can at times frustrate. He's had a few blinders this year. Obviously, the Essendon game, the Gold Coast game, he was important against Collingwood. He's forward pressure good against Carlton. But I just feel that if he could just tighten that gap between his best days and his worst days can be a little bit, arguing with umpires about free kicks, spraying shots at goal, having shots when he shouldn't, and those sorts of things. He's a mercurial match winner who absolutely has to be in our side every week. There were a lot of people last year saying, he should be dropped or leave him out. Clearly best 22, genuinely a match winner, but I'd just love it if he could tighten up that gap between the best and the worst, because he can be a bit frustrating on those bad days.
The problem for him is he clearly doesn't have a head, according to the umpires on
Friday night. That free kick at halftime, I mean, the only one worse than that was the one he didn't get the week before against Carlton.
The week before,
but and then he finally got a free kick in the last quarter and kicked it out in the full, unfortunately. But it's one that I'm kind of complimenting him at the same time because of how good he can be. That's so St Kilda. Probably a bit harder, Charlie. You did kind of mention it with Kain firing up the Kangas, but he's been doing that in fairness all year. So
yeah. Look, I mean, I think just the whole losing to Port, it felt very St Kilda.
And Friday night,
it was just it reminded me a bit of the game in 2021 where we had to keep our finals hopes alive. Port were looking wobbly. They came to Marvel, empty stadium. We were in form, and we just couldn't get it done. And it wasn't like a particularly
very similar game.
Loss, but we just couldn't get it done. And I was like, that felt so St Kilda. But let's hope that, much like your Shenandoah Award, this becomes less relevant as the year goes on.
There aren't too many others, I don't think, Nick. Obviously, hopefully we're not talking about one next week. But I think that probably sums it up, just getting the Friday night opportunity. We didn't do a lot wrong, but didn't get it done. So
that and I think the Jack Hayes one. I think kind of starting to get a bit of a head of steam and players coming back. Started with Jack Steele, and obviously as we get closer towards Max King coming back and Tim Membry's come back, and all that sort of stuff. To have another kind of serious injury to Jack Hayes, and I think everyone was kind of looking forward to see him get back out there kind of mid-year and see what he could do. We were all looking forward to that, and just to see him go down again just feels like it's so St Kilda.
Yep. I think that's a fair summary, and fingers crossed, whoever does come into that Sandy side, be it Jones or Webster, can push on and give us some options for next week. We look to the Kangaroos on Sunday. Hope you've enjoyed this and all of the podcasts. You can catch our full catalogue wherever you get your podcast. Give us a review if you can be so kind. Thank you to Charlie for stepping in this week. I'm sure it won't be the last time with our bit of a revolving door that we have at the moment. But
You've got to
Saints.
get me back on after a win for once, please.
That's right.
Like I've done 2 losses in a row now. Like, get me on for a win.
Well,
hopefully it'll be the last Saturday in September. Oh, no! Did I put the Moz on it?
No. That would be so St Kilda. But we look forward to catching you again next week as hopefully we reflect on a solid day at the office against the Kangaroos. Go Saints.